yourself a generous person? If you were arrested and convicted and charged with generosity, would there be enough evidence to convict you?
That's correct.
You know, sometimes we think we are, but it doesn't really show up. Here's how Merriam-Webster defines generous. Freely giving or sharing money or other valuable things, providing more than the amount that is needed or normal, abundant or ample, showing kindness or concern for others. Now, we often think of generosity in terms of money or things, but what I know is that people who are generous, they share their time, their talent, they share their creativity, they share their beauty, they share their love, they share their joy. And generous people share forgiveness as well. Ideally, they forgive themselves and others. And ideally, generous people also are generous with themselves in the ways of giving themselves what they need as far as rest and renewal, giving themselves time, an opportunity to carve out the time in their day or week to do the things that they love. Where generosity comes in so many forms. Generous people share respect and smiles, resources and joy, creativity, and they share of themselves as they serve. We see that in wondrous ways here. I mentioned a couple of people earlier, but that's only a smidgen. There are so many generous souls that serve this community, and I am so grateful. And generous people know that generosity leads to greater happiness. Joshua Becker, in an article about generous people, wrote, "Studies confirm what generous people already know. Giving increases happiness, fulfillment, and purpose in the life of the giver. We were not designed to be creatures of selfishness. Instead, we were designed to seek and discover happiness in loving and caring for others. Those who decide to look for fulfillment there quickly discover it." Now, as kids, we start out generous. We've got a little video here. There's no sound, but that's okay, it's in a different language. We have subtitles. So she's basically setting it up so these kids will have time alone. And she's basically saying, "I'll be back in 5 minutes, you go ahead and start eating. Count to 3.
Oh. Karen, one has a sandwich and one has an empty plate.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
it's cute.
Oh.
And now it shows the same kids, and they start sharing
And they
with each
share.
other.
Oh.
One
She's
sandwich,
tearing the
she's
machine.
ripping it. That's good. One sandwich.
Oh.
Some of them are tearing the sandwich apart and deciding who gets the biggest part.
Uh-oh.
And they're all looking very, very pleased.
Yeah.
Oh,
nice.
It says, in a world with the ability to feed double its population, 3.5 million children keep dying because of acute malnutrition every year. We should learn from the children.
That's good.
So we don't start out not sharing. I mean, we start out sharing naturally. But then something seems to happen to some of the people on our planet, in our society. Maybe it's our culture of rugged individualism, that idea that says, I can take care of myself and my family, and you should be able to too, no matter that you're disabled, no matter that you're not paid a living wage. I'm taking care of mine, you should too. Or maybe it's that we have developed this culture where there are so many people who are working 40 hours a week or more, many more, and still are not paid enough to cover their basic living expenses. There's a real inequality. We've got the greed and competition, the haves and the have-nots. And we've been brainwashed, I think that greed and competition are the way it needs to be. But studies have shown over and over and over that cooperation, collaboration, and sharing are what's really, really effective. Again and again, life experience shows us that generous people are way happier than those who are not generous. And generous people have open hands and open hearts because they know that that is what allows the flow of abundance, the flow of love, the flow of all good things. Open hands. So let's do an experiment, if you would, please, with me. We're going to do a couple of statements, and first we're going to say them twice with our fists closed, and then we're going to say the same statements with our hands and our hearts open. So think about someone you care about. Now, we're going to say, I care about you. A couple of times with our hands into fists. I care about you.
I care about you.
I care about you.
I care about you.
Now open your hands. I
I
care about you.
care about you.
I care about you. I'm going to do one more statement. I am willing to give and receive.
I am willing to give and receive. I am willing to give and receive. I am willing to give and receive. I am willing to give and receive.
Do you feel that?
Yes.
When we open our hands and our hearts, love can flow through. And it's also really handy to, if you're listening to somebody, to help your hands open, because it helps you to stay present and to stay tuned in and to really accept what it is that they're sharing with you. And generous people believe that changing even one life is worthwhile. Once again, here's what Joshua Becker wrote. Generous people are quick to admit that the world's problems will never be solved by one person, and perhaps never completely solved even in the future. But perfection does not slow them. To them, changing even one life within their sphere of influence is reward enough, is a worthwhile endeavor to be sought. So there's a little story that goes with this. While walking along a beach, an elderly gentleman saw off in the distance someone reaching down and throwing something into the water, into the ocean. And he watched, and soon he noticed that this was a little boy. And walking along, picking up, throwing gently, doing it again and again and again. So as the little boy came closer, the older gentleman said, "What is it that you're doing?" And the little boy said, "I'm throwing starfish back in the ocean." And the man said, "Well, don't you understand? There are miles and miles of beach, all filled with starfish. Why are you doing this?" And the little boy said, "You know, the sun is coming out and the tide is going out, and if we don't throw them back, they'll die." But the gentleman said, "But don't you know you're not making a difference? There are just too many." And the little boy patiently listened and reached down, picked up a starfish, threw it out past the breaking waves, and said, "It made a difference for this one." Each life that we make a difference in is important. And generous people recognize that we live in an abundant universe and that the resource pie is not limited. Joshua Becker said, the mindset of competition, that my resources only grow when someone else's shrinks, is based on a faulty premise. It assumes there's a finite-sized pie, and if someone else enjoys success, my opportunity shrinks. But quite frankly, this thinking is incorrect. The pie of resources is not finite. Now, certainly we know that there are some resources that are finite. Our oil, our coal, the natural resources that we take from the earth. But then there are other things like ideas, like creativity, joy, love, and there is no end to the success. So if I have this pie, and this pie is success, and I'm successful, but I want to help somebody else be successful, it doesn't damage me in any way. It doesn't take away from my success for me to share all that I can share. There's plenty to go around. There's even plenty of food to go around. In spite of the fact that 3.5 million children are dying every year from malnutrition. We're not sharing. Ken Gordon, the spiritual leader of the entire Center for Spiritual Living organization, tells a story from his past. He was once a farmer. He says, when I was farming in Southern California, I once grew 10 acres of onions. In 3 months' time, I produced a total of 1 million pounds of onions. At the same time, I observed corporate farmers growing produce on plots of land as large as 640 acres. Ken had 10. However, not all of what they grew would make it to market. The corporate farms would prepare the ground, plant the crop, water, fertilize, and then when it was time to harvest, they would check the commodities report. And if it ended up not being profitable, huge tractors would come up in the next day and plow it all under. Now, when Ken asked, what's this about? Of course he was told, it's about the money. We don't want to threaten the price of the onions that do go to market. And we're certainly not willing to pay for transportation so that things can be shared or even sold in other markets away from here. We're not sharing. And then there are hundreds of thousands of pounds of tons of grain that are in silos, waiting for the price to go up. And meanwhile, people go hungry, go to bed hungry, not only in other countries, but in our country, in our state, in our county. So something needs to change. What we know is that things change first with vision. Now, of course, we need to do all we can do. If there are legislative issues that we can affect by sharing our opinions, we should do that. If there are ways that we can impact hunger that we are called to do, we should do that. And we are the ones that get to hold the vision. We're the ones that get to hold the vision of a world in which resources are shared. Our theme for the year is a world that works for everyone. We get to hold that vision. Do you want it? Do you want a world that works for everyone? And generous people know that they're giving from the abundance of spirit, the abundance of the universe. They're giving their time, their talent, their money. All of this is certainly just part of the flow. Our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes, said, the gift of life is already made. If the gift of life is already made, then our part is to accept, receive, believe in, and use it. And I think if he was here, he would add, and share it.
Mhm.
So think of someone you love. Feel the love in your heart. Imagine it flowing around them. Imagine wishing the best for them. And then think, if you did this every day, even if you did it every hour of every day, would you ever run out of love? There's an abundance. And so we get to use that abundance. Because just as love will never run out, that's the way God is. That's the way Spirit is. That's the universe that we have been gifted into. That's the generosity that's available to us. Now, not everything is as easy to share as other things. I mean, there are some people that say, and for all of us, there are some things that are easier than others. Some people say, well, I can share my love, but I can't share my money. Now, if any of you can relate to that at all, I would invite you into the practice of spending 2 or 3 minutes a day. Imagine that you could share your money just as easily as you could share your love, or just as easy as you could share food. Just imagining that generosity, imagining how it feels, and whatever your things are, whatever it's difficult for you to share. Imagine that you can share it as easily as you share the easiest thing in the world. So if you could give absolutely anything, if you could be generous with absolutely anything, what would it be? What are your gifts? What is it that you have come here to share? Think about sharing that. Just feel for a moment right now what it feels like in your heart to imagine sharing what you share best. For as we feel it, as we imagine it, as we see it in our mind, that is the very essence of the affirmative prayer that we teach. Making it real right here, right now. Acting as if. And so as we allow ourselves to feel our givingness, to feel what we give best, that is powerful. Dr. David Alt from the Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta said, mental science principles teach that you are what you think you are. Not what someone else thinks you are, but what you continuously, habitually define yourself to be. And so as we close, I invite you to define yourself as generous. I invite you to imagine and dwell on yourself as a prosperous, in every way, not just money, prosperous, generous person, sharing your love, sharing your creativity, sharing your time, sharing your talents, sharing your treasure, sharing all that you have come to share. What do you think? Does that sound like a pretty good idea?
Yeah, it does.
You with me on?
You betcha.
I invite practitioners to stand with me as we move into prayer. Right here in the midst of God, in the midst of abundance, in the midst of prosperity, in the midst of all that we could ever want or need, I know that this is the way God is. That there are ways that we can block this. There are ways that we have yet to open to it in wondrous, wondrous ways. And yet this oneness, this abundance, this flow is always here for us to enjoy and to share. I know that I am one with it. I know that each person here is one with it. I know that Center for Spiritual Living Boulder Valley is one with it. That as we go forward this week, it is remembering what we have come here for. Remembering the joy that comes from sharing. And being blessed, blessed, blessed. And I know that we are supported in this, that each path is filled with things that make it easy to remember how prosperous we are. Each path is filled with things that make it easy to remember how blessed we are. Things that fill our path, that magnetize us to sharing with the perfect people in the perfect ways, with perfect organizations, as we open our hearts and listen. Well, I know that all givingness, all sharing comes from our hearts. So I'm so grateful, grateful, grateful that we are supported in opening our hearts, that we are supported in all that we do. And knowing this, I simply release it into that part of God that has all the stuff and all the know-how, that is already arranging all that needs to be arranged for this to come into manifestation right here and right now. And so I simply let go and invite you to say with me.